the parties who benefit from fueling and perpetuating wars, conflicts, and occupation. But as civil society organizations and as we represent societies living in the midst of these conflicts, we should be proud that through the struggle of many years, we were able to impose this issue on international dialogue platforms. Some of the advisors of the Food Systems Conference are aware of the depth of the efforts in order to reach this location. I mentioned Mrs. Gerda Freiberg, the former Dutch minister who had a positive and distinguished role supporting our efforts through 3 years of negotiations from 2012 till 2015, negotiations on protracted crisis, in particular through her position as chair of the Committee on World Food Security in Rome, as well as Councillor David Nabarro, who has supported our efforts by leading the high-level expert forum on food security. These efforts have resulted in a historical document on the framework for action to confront food insecurity in the light of protracted crisis, which did justice to societies living in the shadow of wars and conflicts. The question addressed for these two advisors is the following. Why was this framework kept on the shelves? Why do they insist from scratching? Why do they insist on starting from scratch? Is this not evidence of the lack of political will to reach radical solutions along this path? The other question is why experts such as Mr. Michael Fakhri, the rapporteur on the right to food at the United Nations, not an active member in organizing for this conference, while he has been holding intense dialogues in order to hear the various voices in different parts of the globe without any discrimination. We realize that what is currently being proposed is a way to lift the blame, and perhaps this is the worst, to search for how to accumulate more profits by supporting more sedition, wars, and conflicts and covering up the crimes of the occupation. But the opportunity available to us is today to realize our hopes, and it is much greater than before. It can be done through intensifying our common global struggle and to continue until the end. Our meeting today is the greatest proof of this struggle. Thank you for your attention. I wish success for our endeavors, and I hope that we can truly reach strong recommendations that we can follow up on with the international community. I am pleased now to present to you Mrs. Silvia Malari, co-chair of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty, PCFS. She was part of this struggle over the past years, and I would like to give her the floor so that she introduces us to the Global People's Summit on Food Systems. The floor is yours, Mrs. Silvia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roseanne. Greetings to everyone, and thank you all for coming. During the 46th session of the UN Committee on World Food Security last 2019, the UN Food Systems Summit, or the UNFSS, was announced and set to happen this coming September 2021. It promises to create bold, game-changing solutions and actions to achieve all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This was received following conversations with the joint leadership of the 3 Rome-based United Nations agencies, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and the World Food Programs at the High-Level Political Forum in July 2019. As we gather here today, a pre-summit of the UNFSS is also happening in Rome, Italy, which started last July 26, the other day, which will last until tomorrow, July 28. It is set to reveal the results of dialogues that will supposedly transform global food systems toward eradicating hunger, reducing poverty, and facing the climate crisis. The food systems approach is extremely needed at a time where several tipping points in the economy, politics, agriculture, climate, and health converge. It is a deeper look into the machinations of the UNFSS, the players, premises, and frameworks. It reveals the familiar face of neoliberalism that plunged the world in the crisis we face today, as the one who maps out the policy agenda on food, agriculture, and food systems for the future. Agricultural trading monopolies such as Cargill, ADM, Bunch, Dreyfus, and Costco posted astronomical earnings even as the pandemic caused more than a billion people in chronic hunger and malnutrition. Cargill has been able to consolidate more than 3 billion US dollars in farmland assets globally through its private equity firms Porotera and Black River that are dedicated to farmland buyouts. The agribusiness giant has also been using its investment firms in collaboration with local ruling capitalists to control lands that it could not otherwise get its hands on due to existing constitutional or legal restrictions on foreign ownership of land and establish large-scale plantations at the expense of rural communities. Decades of sustainable intensification pushed by champions of genetically modified seeds and fossil fuel hungry agriculture have deforested wildlife areas, collapsed fish stocks, and eroded environmental boundaries. The climate emergency claimed victims of the global south as major catastrophes of locusts, typhoons, and earthquakes threaten lives and livelihoods. The convergence of corporate giants and plutocrats, known as the World Economic Forum, has been bankrolling and encroaching civil society spaces in food and agriculture in the last decade, and it has recently entered a strategic partnership with the UN in 2019. We can only expect corporate dictates to mold the results as a sordid mix of GMC lobbyists like CropLife, land-grabbing enablers, cartel associations, and WEF-funded NGOs were handpicked to lead the summit through an opaque process of selection. It should be noted that the World Economic Forum is expecting global meat substitutes to grow into a 6 billion US dollar market by 2023. In April last year, we launched a sign-on statement calling to cut the UNWEF partnership, and our message is clear and is clearer than ever, which continues to today. We reject the corporate hijacking of the 2021 UN Food System Summit. A total of 155 organizations and 7 advocates from 31 countries have supported the sign-on statement, and we have submitted the same to concerned UN offices and its special rapporteur on the right to food. With the appointment of Agnes Kalibata, former head of the Bill Gates funded Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, or AGRA, as a special envoy of the UNFSS, neoliberal solutions such as sustainable intensification and climate-smart agriculture are at the spotlight, while human rights and the right to food to be is an afterthought. Also, the peasant right to land and resources, people's right to development and self-determination remain unfounded in the documents of the UNFSS. Instead of democratically elected governments, instead of civil society organizations and people's organizations at the helm of agenda setting, the same military-backed corporations and corporation-backed militaries who impose sanctions and wage wars are the ones who have the mic. While corporations gaining ground in policy spaces is nothing new, this shift to multi-stakeholderism enthroned profit-driven stakeholders to be at the same level, if not at a more powerful position, with governments and civil society. It is an open admission of defeat for multilateral agencies and a death threat to the hungry peoples of the world, its food producers, and our planet. While the UNFSS discussions have been organized around action tracks, wherein various stakeholders can supposedly foster new actions and partnerships, and amplify existing initiatives for food systems transformation. The UNFSS website says that these action tracks draw on the expertise of different actors who explore how so-called levers of change like human rights, finance, and innovation can be tapped to transform the food systems. But an examination of the leadership of the action tracks reveals the firm grip that big corporate interests have over the entire FSS process. The discussion on tracks like track 5 will be discussed later amply by our following speakers. Um, uh, Indeed, we will have to reclaim, there is a need to reclaim our voices in the transformation of the food systems for a just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable food systems. There is a need for a global people summit, a counter event to the UNFSS, and one that is rid of corporate interests, which puts the interests of the people before profit. The major outcome of this Global People Summit will be a People's Action Plan to realize the just, equitable, healthy, and sustainable food systems. We wish each one of us a very productive discussion tonight. Thank you all. Long live international solidarity.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Long live international solidarity. We all reject the kidnapping and the hijack of the summit. We are all together. Thank you so much. والآن أحب أن أقدم
Allow me
المتحدث.
now to give the floor to the next speaker.
أقدم لكم متحدثتنا الثانية السيدة مريم
Our next speaker
الجعجع.
is Mrs. Mariam Al-Ja'ja.
هي المديرة العامة
She is the
للمجموعة
general manager
العربية
of the Arab
لحماية
Group for the
الطبيعة،
Protection of Nature, APN.
وهي المنسقة لمجموعة العمل
She
الدولية
is
حول
also the
الصراعات.
coordinator of the working group on conflict.
تفضلي مريم.
The floor is yours, Mariam.
اوكي مرحبا جميعا. العرض
Hello everyone. This presentation will be in English today.
أعتقد إنه يمكننا سماع المترجمين على الشانل للأف.
I believe that you can also hear the interpreters on the English channel. And it seems that the speaker is hearing the interpretation at the same time. She needs to fix this technical issue.
Okay, so I will speak today about concepts and frameworks that are relevant to our discussion today. As Razan has said, I am the manager of the Arab Group for the Protection of Nature. I'm also a facilitator for a working group on conflict and crises within the civil society mechanism connected with the Committee on World Food Security. So the structure of my presentation today, first, after giving a brief introduction, I will give a few words about track 5 of the United Nations Food Systems Summit. I will move then to speak about the triple nexus approach, and then I will give a description and speak about the importance of the framework for action for food security and nutrition in protracted crises. Then I will move to speaking a little bit about the current situations, and then then I'll move to conclude with my recommendations. So briefly, as an introduction, it's quite important to say, and it's evident to say, that the relationship between conflict and food security is rather a complex one, where one enhances the other. The majority of food insecure and undernourished people in the world live in countries that are experiencing conflict. And this is because wars, conflict, sanctions, and occupation lead to drastic breakdowns in food systems and in livelihoods. Unfortunately, in the past 20 years, we've had a dramatic increase in conflict and war and all the implications and the manifestations it has, including displacement. Today, we have the number of displaced people around the world is 80% higher than it was in 2010, while internal displacement has reached an all-time high. And of course, displacement really exacerbates the food insecurity in the context of crisis and conflict. What many scholars and civil society organizations and representatives of communities that are impacted by conflict and war have recognized that today the aim is no longer to win a war, but rather to sustain wars for geopolitical and economic interests. So the tools that are being used and the approach and the goal of launching wars is different. And what we have also recognized that this topic is a very sensitive topic. It's continuously stifled in international discussions, and for two reasons. One, because it's compulsory to look at root causes when we want to address food insecurity and crises. And the second thing is that this need to look at root causes requires political will, which we see lacking in a lot of platforms. So moving on to the United Nations Food Summit track 5, we believe that this track is a continuation for the timidness and hesitation to addressing food insecurity in times of conflict, occupation, and in the context of sanctions and war. And we've also witnessed this precisely because affected communities have not been invited to meaningfully get involved in the process of designing and elaborating track 5. Affected communities are absent in the organizational structure and process. They are also only asked to submit forms and proposals, but these proposals they might never get through because the decision making and be heard. Am I heard? It disregards existing frameworks, such as the CFS-FFA, which I'll speak about later. There's only a shy and single mention of the CFS-FFA. There's also a dilution of the issues on conflict, man-made disasters, human rights, and national reconciliation. We barely see any focus or reference to these elements. And we believe that track 5 of the UNFSS is not only reinventing the wheel or merely reinventing the wheel, it's actually destroying the wheel. It's destroying the many strides that we have taken in the past years. So quickly moving on to the triple nexus, which is a trendy concept that tries or attempts to connect the three elements of humanitarian and development aid and peace building. So we do recognize, and we have always pushed as civil society organizations on the need of interlinking these three aspects and the importance of connecting between short and long-term goals. But the triple nexus, or what we call as humanitarian development peace nexus, as it stands, remains as a concept and not a framework. First, it's unclear on how to achieve the coherence between these three elements. It is very ambiguous on the treatment of root causes and of drivers of food insecurity and of human rights obligations. Thirdly, the peace pillar, promoted as one of the three dimensions, is always missing from policy and action. And at the moment, peace building is not really defined. And when we do not define peace building, there are huge risks. One would be to, we are left to mean peace, identify peace building with short-term stability and the absence of violence, which is rather than the upholding of rights and the right to justice and access to justice. And also it will reinforce existing imbalanced power relations. So as we have always said, communities that are impacted need to be in the center of the definition of peace building. Just peace is required for sustainability, durability, and genuine reconciliation. So unlike the triple nexus, which is very ambiguous on how to connect these three elements, the framework for action for food security and nutrition in protracted crises gives explicit guidance on how to achieve this coherence. It is a result of a 3 year of preparation and negotiation in the UN Committee on World Food Security. It was endorsed in 2015. It welcomed the participation of all actors, governments, which were equally treated. There was an equal discussion between governments, between the North and the South, between the governments that are in crisis and the ones that are not. Civil society, international organizations, and even the private sector were part of this discussion. 11 principles were endorsed, but the most important thing about the FFA, which I am trying to I'm trying to explain to you today, is that it was pushed and celebrated by affected communities. We were able to gather more than 150 community organizations countries, from conflict-infected countries, to join in the negotiations, the preparation, and the steering committee of this document. And why do we believe that the CFSFA is unique and it provides the people's narrative? Essentially, we were able to integrate and push in and advocate for concepts that were not there before in previous platforms and in previous discussions. One of the most important aspects of this framework is that it revolves around resolving underlying causes of conflict and crisis and their impacts. So issues such as human rights and humanitarian law are in the center, the protection of affected communities, including in times of conflict, including in times of occupation, the prevention of the use of food as a tool for political and economic pressure, as well as it deals with how cooperation partners should be not exacerbating conflicts in countries of crisis. Also, it defines resilience as not only preparation or absorbing crisis, but also preventing these crises. So these are the major wins that civil society and affected communities were able to put. Also, the FFA is directed at all actors that have a role in triggering conflict, not only in countries in crises. It pushes for country ownership, and this is something really, really important, and it was quite tricky in the negotiation phase, because it very clearly mandates or demands like donors to align their support with national priorities and mechanisms, so to avoid creating parallel systems in countries. It also is very clear about the reasons why previous policies failed, such as vested commercial, political, and institutional interests. Finally, one of the main wins that civil society was able to integrate was to introduce concepts that are very important to people's sovereignty over natural resources and food, including the importance of supporting local food systems in times of crises, building food reserves, local food reserves, pushing for local food procurement to avoid food dumping by donors, respecting tenure rights of members of affected populations. So after giving you a snapshot importance of the important concepts that they were included during the negotiation phase, where are we now? So 5 years later, after an endorsement of the framework for action, the framework has not been effectively disseminated, implemented, or monitored, despite the great and enormous efforts put by affected communities to try to disseminate and advocate governments and even the Rome-based organizations that work on food issues. the document has not been pushed forward. 4 years after the promotion of the concept of triple nexus, which I explained in 2016, also there has been no impact. There is an obvious lack of political will to transform these concepts and frameworks into an implementation plan that describes roles and coordination processes. There's still a break and divergence between humanitarian development and peace building, and us as affected communities are not invited to participate in any of the work of these actors in all these platforms, and including the UNFSS Track 5. So very briefly, so as it stands now, humanitarian and development aid, after the endorsement of these concepts and frameworks, they are still politicized. Many countries that provoke or sustain protracted crises are also providing short-term emergency aid to its victims. You have very little funding to building local food systems or national reconciliation. Many actors are maintaining the status quo to fulfill commercial gains and shape the geopolitical order. Foreign intervention and assisting warring states creating sustainable crises, including proxy conflicts, still stands very strong today. We have no accountability mechanisms to these frameworks, and I'm sure we will not have any accountability mechanisms to try to the proposals that are given in the UNFSS or in Track 5 of the UNFSS. Of course, there's no attempt to look at extraterritorial obligations of states. So these are the obligations of states outside of their borders. My recommendations in a nutshell. So to ask these global platforms to unify their work. It is really inefficient to be discussing frameworks scattered in minimum 3 platforms across the globe, including the CFS in Italy and in New York, the UN in New York, and then you have also Geneva. We need and we request international organizations to unify their work. We also request that they mainstream the framework for action. This framework should have been central to Track 5, and we are surprised it is not, since the FFA was hosted by FAO, WFP, and IFAD, who should be also involved in the UNFSS. We need all these principles and nice concepts translated into policies and programs. On our end, we also need us to work on the national level to create local multi-actor platforms. So platforms that are inclusive, so we can discuss food security and national reconciliation independent from outside actors. We need to design, complement each other's work, and monitor the programs that are happening on the national level. We should always put affected communities in the center. We also recommend that governments always create specialized units for food security to monitor programs or that are being implemented within their borders. We also encourage all organizations to carry self-assessments to see whether they are coherent with the framework for action or not. And finally, of course, this is part of our work today, is to always push for and allow space for political solidarity with and between affected communities. And these are, before I finish, these are the 2 resources that I recommend you look at. So the CFS FFA for food security and crises, it is on the FAO website, and also the CSM report, the civil society mechanism report on monitoring the use and application of the FFA, which many organizations that are here today organizing or speaking or participating have contributed to. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Miriam, for a very comprehensive portrait of people's narrative. We are very eager to listen to our other esteemed speakers, and we are very eager for the discussion to be in the third session, where all the interventions will be highly welcome. أشكركم جزيل الشكر على سماعكم وانتباهكم.
I'd like to thank you very much for listening and for your attention in the first session. Now we move to the second session by Mrs. Beverly from CPDE. And I believe that there will be a short movie that the secretariat of our conference will be displaying. Thank you very much, and I wish you success.
Bev, I think they are showing a film right now.
I think so too. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all our participants. Welcome to the second part of our webinar today. So the second part of our forum will we listen to a set of presentations from esteemed speakers on 5 particular themes on situations of food systems in the context of conflict and fragility. In this session, we shall present the realities of war, occupations, and other forms of conflict in relation to our right to food, and expose the current system, how it breeds, how it operates, and how it breeds and thrives on the existence of such conflicts. We would like to thank Razan, Sylvia, and Mariam for providing us a background of our webinar today on the UN Food Summit on food systems, and then of course our counter summit on the Global People's Summit. So to start off, we have Hala Murad, who's from Jordan. She is the director of the Dibin Association of Environmental Development, and she will be sharing with us the role of sanctions, destruction of food resources, and aid in times of conflict, particularly in the Arab region. So welcome, Hala, you have the floor. Hala, can you unmute yourself? I think you're still on mute.
أعتقد أن الميكروفون شغال الآن. هل تسمعونني؟ Are you hearing me?
لا مش كتير واضح.
الصوت ضعيف؟ الصوت ضعيف فعلا.
Yes, it's not clear. It is very soft.
عم تسمعوني هلا من الحساب هذا؟
Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Yes, it's much better. Yes, much better. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, but please mute the other device. Is it better now? Now, yes?
أفضل ممتاز فيك تبلشي.
Yes, it's perfect. You can start. Yes, thank you very much. At the outset, I am Hala Murad from the Bean Association for Environmental Development. I am also member of the the Arab Network on Food Sovereignty, and I'm very proud of that and active in the civil society. It's very important to voice the concerns of CSOs, whether in Jordan or in other Arab countries. At the outset, as you all know, our Arab region is one of the regions that's unfortunately suffers for 100 of years from crises, conflicts, violations, and big divisions made by big external forces or occupation forces, which has adversely affected its assets and natural resources, agricultural resources. All of that did affect its food security. And here I hope that all of those who are with us from the different Arab countries, those who are listening to me in Arabic as well, are asked to share with us their experiences via the chat if they have anything to add up to what I will mention or any new updates or about the latest developments when it comes to food security in the Arab world. Especially in the last 10 years or 11 years, I mean, since the so-called Arab uprising. The food security in the Arab world was largely connected to several terms, hard terms, crisis-oriented terms. You have, and you can mention war, indebtedness, pandemics, occupation, multinationals, internal conflicts and external conflicts, and all of these general conditions and global circumstances affect the so-called human rights crisis connected to food security. And here, because I only have 8 minutes, I'll be depicting certain models from the Arab world, and I will be sharing projections as mentioned by Mariam in the previous session, because the context that Mariam highlighted help us all to frame this situation that is unique of its kind when it comes to human rights and food-related matters in our region. To start, first and foremost, we can say that Palestine is the first state to be mentioned because of all what the Palestinians suffer from in the territories in terms of food-related issues, human rights-related issues, and different natural resources-related issues. First, the Israeli occupation since 1948, since the occupation of Palestine, fights and launches battles against Palestine. At the top, the fight against food sovereignty and natural resources sovereignty with different daily practices and systematic practices in order to impose a status quo with food insecurity, whereas the Palestinian situation shows that around 80% of the Palestinians in the Palestinian territories receive food assistance. More than 80% of the people receive food assistance. However, if we want to speak about the food situation in general, we have to speak about deprivation of agricultural inputs, because the Palestinian people are mainly deprived of having agricultural inputs, seeds, seedlings, and even water security. Water security being one of the main problems that the brothers in Syria suffer from. Our brethren in the occupied territories suffer from issues with water territories and daily confiscation and seizures for reasons related to what they call the security of the Zionist entity, or for the establishment of settlements, development of settlements that started with the occupation of the West Bank. As you can see here, we have the confiscation of agricultural lands, the destruction of the infrastructure of agricultural lands, the deforestation for trees that are hundreds of years old prior to the occupation, and the attacking and targeting of agricultural lands during wars. The latest war against Gaza is not too old, and in a report issued with the ANP and the Arab Network, we've identified all what was happening within Gaza in particular and in the Palestinian territories in the latest Gaza war. And the occupation forces were clearly targeting agricultural lands and are trying as much as possible to target the seedlings, the plants, the cattle, and the infrastructure pertaining to cultivation and agriculture in particular. The undermining of agricultural policies and the dependence on external aid. A lot of agricultural policies are not considered a priority, but they shouldn't be so, but they're promoted as such. And I think that the food security within Palestine is much more important. We shouldn't be only thinking about export policies or cultivating products and crops that are not needed with a large number of fruits, while there is self-sufficiency. So the undermining of the agricultural policies, the weakening of the institutions that do help farmers impose certain policies that might not be a priority. The sanctions also, and here we speak about imposing strict sanctions against farmers as if the sanctions really punish the farmers. Whatever happens within the Palestinian territories in terms of confrontations between the combatants, the resistance forces and the occupation prevents the Palestinians from cultivating their lands or from hunting within the sea borders. 3 days ago, a sanction was imposed against Gaza, preventing them from hunting beyond 6 miles. And in the international customs, that is a type of collective sanction.
Hala?
The Palestinian cause
Hala?
is a thorny one.
Hala, you have
Yes.
1 minute left to finish your presentation.
Oh my.
Yes.
شكرا. ايضا احنا نتحدث عن سوريا.
Thank you. All right, I will speak about Syria and self-sufficiency. From self-sufficiency, we moved to famine and starvation, and we know that Syria used to enjoy food stability. And Jordan is one of the countries that enjoys political stability, but unfortunately, we are in front of a food crisis. The last report issued a couple of days ago speaks about food insecurity in Jordan. So we are about to encounter a real problem mainly related to the water, which is under the management of the occupation authority. And here the occupation practices certain exercises to have control over resources, especially water. And we speak about food insecurity in Iraq as well. And we know that we moved from the embargo to the war, to corruption in Iraq. And there were 3 different stages when it comes to food security. And unfortunately, these different stages really destroyed food security. We all know about the oil for food program, which was full of corruption. A lot of corrupt and spoiled food was exported to Iraq, which is now suffering from food insecurity. And at the end, we can speak about the biggest disaster across the globe. It is the Yemen. Yemen is a brother country. There is a continuous, unprecedented economic and agricultural degradation, continuous conflict. No other country across the globe lives and or goes through the same situation because of the floodings as well. We speak about dimension 5, as mentioned by Mariam. We don't only speak about conflicts, but all the crises, including natural disasters. And Yemen lost thousands of dunams and tons of crops because of natural disasters. And now the people is under a big crisis connected to food security. And unluckily, unfortunately, all what's being done by the world is momentous assistance and aid, while an intensive program is needed to foster the work with the civil society in order to revitalize the cultivation. At the end, Libya, everyone knows that Libya has billions worth resources, billions of resources worth a lot. And with the embargo, 30 seconds, everyone knows that Libya has a lot of resources and assets worth billions, but that is not enough for providing for what is needed. And we really live in a real problem in the Arab world for many years of occupation and dependence on administrations, US, American administration, Western administrations. As people, we need to stand by each other in order to achieve life, rights, justice, and freedom for our people. And that can only happen by working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hala, for sharing with us the different phases of the struggle for food security across the Arab region, which is home to many of the countries severely affected by conflict. I mean, for decades, you have shown the impact of war that has ravaged these countries, wars of aggression and occupations, and this has resulted not only to hunger, but severe economic crisis, and of course, the issue of not only of land grabs, but including natural resources vital for our for people's survival, especially water. And of course, you have shown the impacts of sanctions and of the face of corruption amidst war and hunger. Hopefully, our participants can ask more questions, and we will try to answer them in the third part of our public forum. So thank you again, Hala. Now, our next presenter is Danny David Gonzalez Perez. He's the Vice President of de la Federación Campesina, or the Peasant Federation based in Venezuela. And he shall be sharing with us the impact of blockades on food security and agriculture. He will be presenting in Spanish, so for our listeners, kindly tune in to the channel of your preferred language. Welcome, Danny, and you have 8 minutes for your presentation.
Bueno, sí, hola, muy buenos días. Saludos.
Hello. Hello, everybody. How are you? Good. Hello to everyone. I was listening very carefully. I see that there's a great passion, a wish to do all the things that we have been proposing in this forum. So to put some context with today, what we've been talking about in the forum, there's 231 days of the blockade that was put upon the Venezuelan government and country. So 65 months since 2015 November, when the Obama's president put a blockade on our state, on our country. And from there, this blockade, these sanctions have affected all the process in our country, social processes, economic processes, and political processes above all. This has meant that we have been obliged, we have been forced to reinvent all of our politics, to do food policies and the production, the sanctions on our food production. We can no longer export our food. When we say it's the fault of the government, since the rural peasants movement in Venezuela, we have been organizing our peoples, our communities, to see how we can produce and how we can manage our own food production. So it is a violent cycle that we can't have a quicker way to allowing us to lower our costs and to have free direct access to our own food. So I would like to point out some things. The sanctions, the international sanctions, economic sanctions, they're not only economic, they're also diplomatic. When we spoke about diplomatic sanctions, this doesn't allow us to trade with another national state. So today, for example, we are suffering the consequences of we're talking about the 9th of March 2015, they signed a decree, but since then there have been other decrees that are against our trade, the trade of our PIB, which is oil. So these sanctions prohibit us, mean that we cannot, Venezuela is not allowed to have any type of financing through values, through other governments. So regularly from other governments. So the sanctions are also related. We can't be financed. We can't have any currency. So for example, digital money, we are not allowed to sell digital money. No, we're not allowed to have any digital transfers of money. We're not allowed to have any interaction with another international government, with our national and public agencies. So this means that in our case, our organization, which is a rural organization, is known in some multilateral organisms such as FAO, but sanctions mean they fall upon other organizations and other NGOs, who mean that we are not allowed to trade directly with any transnational businesses when it comes to seeds or agricultural products. So this has changed all our internal processes within our society, but it also means we are dependent on what happens outside in the world. How we are looking at Cuba and how they are becoming victims again of the imperial attack through media corporations that don't really show what's happening there. This is a global situation, not just in Cuba, not just in Venezuela, but in all countries under the pandemic. This is also when we look at our societies. We are trying to reinvent our societies and how we access health. This blockade For example, in Venezuela and Cuba, it's been very specific. Our states, our people today suffer from sanctions imposed by an imperialist government that blocks the nation state, not only politically, but also forces its people into states of need. So multinational organs in Venezuela, sanctions fall directly upon our people and make us suffer directly. We can't produce our food. We need to educate ourselves and work, and that is one of our greatest challenges today. And also,
you have 1 minute to finish your presentation. Thank you.
Un reconocimiento especial.
A special recognition. There is a lot of interest for women within the forum, and we understand that as feminists, that training in this process of transforming society, that women play a huge role in the future of the planet, and gives us a great breath. It gives us a great hope for the times that are coming. And I would like to add that for Venezuela, it's been a challenge to try and deal with this economic blockade. So our government has had to has had to propose new policies to allow us recently to design programs that are targeted specifically towards urban agriculture and food production on small scale production. And the majority of these programs are relevant because they show women's participation. Women, as we know, are those who administer the economy in the family, but they're also very present in how they feed their family. And they understand what we are suffering is the product of imperial aggression, and we have to reinvent our society to see how we can continue resisting against this imperial aggression. I also want to add the topic of, I can't hear the speaker, about using technology as tools, which has helped us recently in 2015. Since 2010, we have been speaker's cut out. I can't hear the speaker. We have been taking to distribution and food trade centers with seeds. They have been limiting us, so the speaker's cut out. I can't hear the speaker. So this has been how we developed this practice. This has been part of our participation up until now. We want to thank you again. Thank you to the organizers of this event, Rafi, Julio, to all of them who's made this connection possible today and to show a window on what is happening in our country. The speaker's cut out. I can't hear the speaker. I'm sorry, the speaker's sound kept cutting out.
Okay, gracias, Danny, for sharing the initiatives of local communities, especially peasants, on how to address these food blockades and diplomatic and trade sanctions that imperialist countries, especially the United States, has imposed on Venezuela. And we are glad that these efforts, while quite challenging, has really helped our communities to address the problem of hunger. Thank you also for giving importance on the role of women in the people's struggle for in Venezuela, and the role of women in addressing hunger. We are sorry that in several parts of your presentation you were cut off, but we would like to inform our participants that we will be providing you a link later wherein you can access the 5 presentations in this session. So thank you very much again, Danny. So we move now to the third speaker, but we would like to also inform again our participants that you can chat if you have questions for our 5 panelists, and then if you have seen some manifestation of the crisis in the food system that has not yet been discussed, and if there are solutions that you would like to recommend in the context of crisis, and then if you have any other messages that you would like to be conveyed to the Global People's Summit and to the UN Food Summit. So again, just chat it in the Q&A box. So our third presenter is Asra Saeed. She is the Executive Director of Roots for Equity based in Pakistan. She is also from the International Women's Alliance. Asra will be sharing with us on food production and the relationship between food aid and liberalization of our economic systems. Welcome, Asra. You have the mic.
Thank you very much, Beverly. I hope I can be heard clearly.
Yes, Asra.
Okay. I will be speaking on food aid in countries facing conflict and the link between the food aid and trade liberalization, which is so rampant in our countries through neoliberalism. So some years ago, in about 2015, 2016, this was a continuation of the operations happening in Pakistan after 9/11. And I will not go into a history of all of that, but we all know that the Americans were in Afghanistan for many years and have just recently departed very hastily, which is also very, very interesting. And in those years that they were here, they were compelling the Pakistan army to clean up the so-called Talibans from the northwestern parts of the country. Not to mention that, of course, the Talibans were created by the Americans themselves. In any case, there were millions and millions of internally displaced people who had to be vacated from those areas where there was conflict between the army and the so-called terrorists. And at that time, we noticed that the Americans were giving a lot of food aid to Pakistan, which is nothing new, but it was something new in that context. And I will go into the more context of aid in a minute. But before that, let me just give you a background on what is the importance of food aid to the Americans. According to a US Food Aid and Security website maintained by a group of private voluntary organizations, the Alliance for Global Food Security, according to them, the combination of handling, processing, and transporting the commodities from the farm to the United States ports, plus the cost of moving the commodities from the United States ports to foreign ports, has the following overall impact on the US economy. It says total output of various US industries amounted to $1.9 billion. Then the earnings of households due to this food aid being moved came up to $518 million and 13,000 jobs were created. This was a figure for fiscal year 2009 for the United States. So that in its very first starting off, it is clear that when food aid is being given, it is being given with the context that it is going to create jobs for the people of the United States and for the industries. Then there are certain additional legal mechanisms which control food aid from the US. One is all agricultural grain must be obtained from the United States. So whatever food aid is being sent out has to be purchased and grown in the United States. At least 50% of all aid to be sent should be through American ships. Second, right? And of all the packaged processed food that reaches other countries as aid, 50% must be carried out by American firms on US soil. And so on. This is how it is meant to be. That when we think that this is humanitarian aid and it is out to stop hunger and all of that, it's not really anything to do with hunger. It has all to do with the lucrativeness of the markets, which aid opens up for these American agencies. So in 2016, when we have always known this, that the American ships are carriers for food aid, that the American firms make a lot of money. So in 2016, we noticed that the United States suddenly, instead of giving food in kind aid, it started giving money to the Pakistani government, saying you can purchase food from your local sources. When we saw this, we started researching a bit more to find out what is going on. I'm sorry to say this, but in my country we have very little belief that the Americans can do any good. So when it seemed that they were actually doing some good, of course, there was a lot of suspicion there, and research showed our suspicion was correct. So what the Americans were now saying was that Pakistan can use its own wheat, but it has to mix micronutrients into the food aid and then distribute that food aid to the IDPs, to the internally displaced persons. What does all this mean? Basically, micronutrients are being produced by 7 global corporations. And of the 7 global corporations, 6 are Americans and 1 is Swiss. Their names are Nestle, Kellogg, Dan Foods, Altria, Kraft, General Mills, and Campbell Soup Company. So you can see that it is very much a stipulation that now you can purchase your own food, but the very expensive micronutrients are bought from abroad, and not only abroad, from European markets and the American markets. And then a process called twining is carried out in the home country. This twining needs specialized machines. So this kind of a new stipulation in food aid meant that not only the government of Pakistan had to purchase the micronutrients from these various corporations, they also had to buy machinery from BASF and other mega corporations who are suppliers of these machineries, because you cannot mix the micronutrients using just local hardware. It has to be through specialized machinery. And so we are now very clear that when USAID is talking about food aid and it is actually giving you money to do it, it is because there is another door has been opened. Previously, the food aid was...
Asra,
Yeah.
you have a minute to finish your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have, I'll just cut it short. There are big amalgamations of organizations now, and one is called GAIN. GAIN is the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Not surprisingly, this was founded by Melinda Gates Foundation. And Melinda Gates Foundation, apart from that, we have the Food Fortification Initiative, which champions effective grain fortification so people have the nutrition they need. All this is really a lot of nonsense, because it is destroying local food production. Millions of small people can set up a small machine and mix the grain at home itself. Now, none of that can be happened, and the government of Pakistan, the Americans, made changed government of Pakistan, its laws on how to mix ingredients, and standardizations were created. So my point is now, and I'll finish with this, is that it is not about aid at all. It is not about humanitarian aid at all. It is the same as sanctions, which is happening in Iran or it's happening in Venezuela. It is a very different form of twisting our arms and ensuring a dependency on their food systems, and at the same time destroying our own local food systems, locally grown food systems, and nutrition, which is very easily available through our own market, is all wiped out because of these corporations. So I will finish with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Asra. Even though I heard that you are not feeling well right now, but thank you very much for that very comprehensive and strong presentation and putting in a nutshell the role of corporations hiding under blankets of foundations to profit not only from hunger, but to profit also from different humanitarian actions in the name of aid. And this has actually also been biased against local industries. No, it actually destroys further local economies and agriculture. And as you have mentioned, it increases the dependence of countries ravaged by hunger and war on the importation. And you have mentioned the role. No, it might be called what do you call this, food aid or humanitarian action, but this is also a form of sanction and control. No, so thank you very much for that, Asra. And so we move now to our fourth speaker, and our fourth speaker is another woman, Gertrude Kenyangi. From the Support for Women in Agriculture and Environment in Uganda. Gertrude will be sharing with us an assessment of humanitarian assistance and the aid system in situations of conflict with respect to to its ability to abide by existing humanitarian principles. So hello, Gertrude. Welcome to our webinar, and you have 8 minutes for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Beverly. I would like to share my screen. Just a minute. Just a minute. Yeah. Okay. I'd like to share my screen with you. That's the one. Just a minute. Yeah. Do you see my screen? Sure. Do you see my screen?
Not yet, Gertrude.
Not yet.
I've shared it. Do you see my screen?
Yes,
we have
yes,
So
we do now.
You do? Assessing humanitarian assistance. Humanitarian principles: humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. Those
Gertrude,
are supposed to be. Yes,
Gertrude,
please.
can you
Yes.
make your presentation full screen so that we can read it?
Okay, just a minute.
Yes,
I've
yes.
made it full. Here it's full screen. Here it's full screen. Yeah. I don't see. Here where I am, it's full screen.
Can you do it on slideshow?
Yes. Is it showing? Here where I am, it's full screen.
Okay, anyway, maybe there's a delay.
I don't know why.
Okay, then you can proceed then, Gertrude.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I think it was small. But you give me feedback if you can see it. Can you?
We can see it, Gertrude. You can go ahead. If you want to put, if you want to put a slideshow, it's the button right next to the minus symbol. at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, I have. I don't know why it's not doing that.
Okay, you can continue because we can see your screen anyway.
Hey, you can.
Gertrude? Yes, proceed.
You're muted.
I'm not muted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Anyway, I'm going to proceed maybe without the screen because I don't see what's happening. Okay. Just a minute. What's happening? Something has happened either to my computer or what, I don't know. Anyway, 85,000 children under 5 years old have starved to death. In Yemen, it is reported. 85 innocent lives snuffed out before they can even begin. They are the innocent victims of a famine caused by a senseless Saudi-led war. Some have claimed that another Yemeni child dies every 10 minutes. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yes, we can see.
Someone is talking to me. Yeah, okay. So in my own country, Uganda, hundreds of children are suffering from nodding disease. All are victims of the Lord's Resistance Army War who grew up in internally displaced people's camps. Medical research have attributed their condition to consuming low-grade, nutritionally unbalanced, and aflatoxin-infested food. Why is this so? Because protracted crises are some of the most lucrative industries on the planet. They provide a market outlet for corporations that have captured our food systems, pushers of GMOs, pesticides, and chemical fertilizer. Someone is reaping profit from the misery of others in the form of aid. It's heartbreaking. And the worst part of it is that most powerful governments in the North are complicit. Humanitarian aid or humanitarian assistance is replete with structural racism. Although many global North aid sector practitioners perceive themselves and the wider sector as operating neutrally, many current practices and attitudes in the aid system mirror and are derived from the colonial era. Yet most organizations and donors in the global North are still reluctant to acknowledge that fact. Please give me another slide. Unequal power dynamics. Humanitarian aid system or humanitarian assistance is full of unequal power dynamics. Power and resources in the system remain dominated by and between certain organizations and relationships, largely based in the global North. Despite commitments to address the inequities in the system, most notably announced at the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul in 2016, little progress has been made in many key areas. This includes funding for local organizations and the way that decisions, power, and control is still held by a relatively small number of donors and international NGOs. Another slide, language. Some of the language used in the humanitarian assistance system reinforces discriminatory and racist perceptions of non-white populations. The phrase capacity building is one example that suggests that local communities and organizations lack skills, require external training, cannot be trusted to manage program funds, while other terms such as beneficiaries portray the global South as uncivilized, as beggars, and field expert perpetuates images of the global North as the white savior. double standards in recruitment of staff, parallel systems for employing staff in the global north and global south, not only in terms of salaries and benefit discrepancies, but also in how skills and experience are devalued in practitioners from the global south. They'll call a person with the same title a counterpart. But do they earn the same salary? Do they have the same benefits? Do they have the same power and control over programs? Biased program design. Humanitarian aid program designs are rooted in Western values and knowledge systems, meaning that many programs inadvertently create a standard based on the West that communities in the global South are required to meet. Local knowledge is by default devalued. Attempts to bridge the global-local divide often focuses on a particular identity group, thereby failing to incorporate an intersectional approach. Practical and strategic needs of women, people living with disabilities, and the elderly are not given special consideration. In conclusion, humanitarian aid is far from being human, is far from being neutral, is far from being impartial, and is far from being independent. What would I recommend? We recommend that you acknowledge that structural racism exists. Acknowledging that structural racism exists does not erase the good that the sector does, nor does it signify a complete rejection of international assistance or cooperation. Moreover, acknowledgement does not imply personal guilt. Nevertheless, there's a collective responsibility to tackle that problem. Would advise the humanitarian assistance organizations to adopt a transition mindset for organizational strategies. International NGOs should consider adopting a transition mindset, putting in place clear milestones for the transfer of power and resources to local organizations. The second recommendation, encourage frank conversations with grantees and communities about power. The third is mind your language. Reassessing existing language, as well as adopting new language and terminologies, can help in shifting from frameworks rooted in colonial histories to new, inclusive, and creative approaches. Would recommend that you recruit differently. Organizations must end the practice of first seeking expatriate staff for any position based overseas. Instead, it should be assumed that all positions can be filled by local staff. And last recommendation is be broad-minded and inclusive. When designing a program, international NGOs should work with local leaders to examine existing models, log frames, and theories of change, and adopt new ones rooted in local contexts. Programs must be evaluated through culturally specific frameworks established by local practitioners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gertrude. Thank you very much, Gertrude. Hello?
Yes, I have this summary. It's
Okay.
the same thing I've made a presentation on. I was hoping that it would show very well. Thank you very much.
Okay. So yes, indeed, Gertrude, you have clearly shown that it's the same corporations, it's the same countries that who profit from war are also profiting from hunger. And the aid architecture, the aid structure also perpetuates, as you mentioned, unequal power dynamics in many aspects, no? Language, resource management, valuations of skills, etc. And you have correctly noted that it's not only an issue of language, but actually even initiatives of non-government and civil society are also co-opted along this framework. And while if these issues remain unacknowledged, even the issue of limited opportunities and spaces for critique, indeed, aid in general will be far from being humane, neutral, impartial, and independent. So again, thank you very much, Gertrude. Now we will move on to our last but not the least fifth speaker, who will summarize or wrap up our session, and before we proceed to the challenges in building sustainable, independent, and just food systems. Our last speaker is Gladys Hernandez. She's the head of the research department on the international finance from the World Economy Research Center in Cuba. She will be presenting through a video recorded presentation. So let's all welcome Gladys.
Hello, thank you so much, dear colleagues, for the opportunity to share some views with you concerning food sovereignty and the manipulation of this special topic as a weapon to overthrow governments and to create unrest and different kind of manifestations in different nations. So I should like to begin um, scrutinizing somehow the causes for this, because this is not a new event. This is something that has been going on through many years in humanity, and this is something that maybe it's very important to take into account. In the first place, we should look for the origins of this topic. We should stress the discrimination and discriminatory practices that are fundamental in the role of taking the land for the people, for the agriculture people, and at the same time the discrimination with subsidies that historically benefit some kind of groups in the societies. For example, if we look at the American people and Latin American people, we know that there are a lot of farmers who have been taking the land from them to give this land to the business, the agriculture business entrepreneurs. So it's something that has become normal to take the land from ones to give to the rich ones. In the second place, we have the expropriation of lands. Expropriations of lands taking into account indigenous communities, those who are supposed to preserve and look for the nature. And one example of this, very important, is in Brazil, for example, or in many indigenous communities all along Latin America, all along developing countries. Then we have the manipulation of prices. This is something very special because once you are dependent on the imports of food products, then you became a source of manipulation. If we take into account that 82 countries in the world are simultaneously importers of oil and importers of food, then you have a weapon there. Because anytime you need to manipulate prices or you need to manipulate a country, you can manipulate prices for food. And then you will have a response on that. Then there is a problem that concerns also prices itself. Let's look at the situation we have today. So there is a crisis that goes on in the economy, but at the same time we have a pandemic. And in the pandemic, the so-called Great Confinement has created special conditions for enhancing the economic crisis. At the same time, there was a loss in production, there was a loss in demand because almost everybody was closed. And there were no exports, there were no imports. Then we have a crisis in environment. So we have climate change with a lot of impacts that also affect the lands and the production in terms of agriculture production. And at the same time, we have a mixture of crises, environmental, taking into account climate change, the financial crisis because countries are not receiving the finance they need, food crisis because countries that were supposed to be importing are not able to import because they don't have the money for that. And at the same time, we have a crisis coming from 2008 that was not solved. Just remember that when the pandemic of COVID-19 started in 2019, the crisis for 2008 was not solved. So there is a mixture of process that made together processes that are supposed to be conjunctural, like the pandemic, and the problems that are supposed to be structural, as this problem with the agriculture land. So the so-called recuperation of the economy, of the global economy, as it has been stated in the year 2021, has been slow and depends mainly on the vaccination that the countries can develop. If we are supposed to think that almost 70% of the vaccination processes today are taking place in developed countries, what can be expected for the others? I mean, there is also inequity and discrimination in this topic. So, at the same time, there is a very concerning danger if we are talking of food prices, of food sustainability. The inflation that this so-called recovery that has started in the year 2021 is promoting fuels at the same time, the inflation. And inflation gives a very, very strong situation for countries who have been accumulating a lot of debts. And this is the case of developing countries. They are importers of fuels, they are importers of food, and at the same time they have huge debts. So if we have a higher inflation now, we will be having a crisis of debt in some months, if not today, because many countries had already stated that they cannot pay their external debt today to their debtors. So inflation is food, and historically has been used also as a weapon, especially concerning sovereignty in terms of food production. To this kind of manifestation, there are also related elements. For example, when there is a crisis in terms of food imports, there is supposed to be social unrest. I mean, Oxfam, one of the NGOs that is very famous for these studies, has stated that during the pandemic, almost 155 million people have been added to poverty, and almost 40 million people are being added to inanition in terms of hungry. I mean, this is a very, very special moment in which the humanity is living a very, very strong crisis. There are different repercussions, but economic sanctions turns to be one element that is also used as a weapon. If you have problems because you cannot import food, you cannot produce because you were closed because of the pandemic, and at the same time you have sanctions imposed by many countries, in this case developed countries, then you are not able to solve your own problems. You are depending in terms of food imports on the imports you receive from the external. And this is something that sanctions act upon. They're supposed to prohibit, to inhibit the countries to develop. And these are traditional resources developed countries turn to overthrow governments, to create social unrest in the country. So this is what we are looking about today in many countries. This kind of social unrest, very, very close related to food prohibitions for import food. And this is very important. When we evaluate a possible solution for that, so the crisis is so huge and there are so many countries affected that actually countries are supposed to turn into their own efforts to solve this problem. And to see how much they are supposed to expend to develop a food system that is supposed to be sustainable and at the same time that creates sovereignty for those countries. Sometimes countries don't evaluate the real possibilities they have. So society has changed. There are a lot of new technical and science developments. And in this sense, maybe Arab countries that are not supposed to be very awkward, I'm sorry for this, but sometimes because of the arid soils they have, agriculture is not so nice for them. But at the same time, if they can use science and technology, they also can grow food products. I mean, it's something of how you evaluate the real cost of the food you will be importing. In this sense, sustainability came first. When you evaluate the cost of food sustainability, you are supposed to evaluate what are the impacts your food production is causing. I mean, you have to have the plantation, then you have to recover this plantation, and then you have to sell it. I mean, what are the costs? But not only the cost associated with the production and selling of the food products, but also the impacts that you are creating in your nature. I mean, how biodiversity can be affected. What are the emissions you are having? And in this kind of scheme, then you can develop a proper national sovereign food system in which you can help your country not to be so dependent. It's clear that not all the imports you have in terms of food imports are supposed to be eliminated. This is impossible, but this is not the Chinese world you are building in terms of food imports. But at the same time, you will be free of importing less food products if you really manage to develop a food system that's more sustainable and is more sovereign. And in this sense, governments are supposed to take into account different elements. For example, in terms of solutions, I should suggest in the first place to try to develop the system, this sovereign sustainable system. In the second place, to try to find a kind of integration that can be complementary among the countries. Maybe some countries can be producing one product, the other will be producing the other. And there is another element that is more critical, but at the same time is essential, is the fact that you are supposed to analyze what kind of agriculture reforms you can design in your country and try to return to the people that was supposed to be agriculture people the land they need to produce. And then you will be reducing this agribusiness all over the world. Your agriculture can become more sustainable, and at the same time, your people will be having the sources to produce. So, taking this into account, I should end my presentation with an idea to have a real sustainability development in terms of food sovereignty. You're supposed to develop a food system that is supposed to be more equal and just for the people. This is not what we have been seeing during the years in this neoliberal world we are living in. So, and this is what the developed countries or those governments that want to impose their will and interest on developing well are taking into account to develop food as a weapon. So this is what I want to share with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I wish you great luck in your event.
Thank you very much, Gladys, for sharing your 5 points in relation to what prevents or disable us, peoples, nations, from achieving sovereignty. On the issue, the 5 points, the first point on discrimination and discriminatory practices that normalizes land grabbing. 2, the exploitation or appropriation of lands and disregard of indigenous people's rights. Third will be the promotion of import dependency on critical resources, and side by side with the manipulation of prices. And fourth, how this interplays with various crises that also worsens the loss in production and results to further inequity and discrimination even in responses to these challenges. And then fifth, on the issue of the role and the resulting inflation, the role of debts, and of course, economic sanctions by powerful states to create social unrest, no? And that enable an overthrow of governments that strive for national sovereign food systems that are not reliant on imports. And I would like to add, before we go, I hand you to the last to our next moderator for the last segment. Will be one we have seen from the presentations of our speakers from the Arab region, to Latin America, to Asia and Africa, that the issue of war, conflict, occupations, and sanctions and humanitarian actions are not isolated events, no, are not isolated issues, but they're actually interrelated, and this is caused by a system, a structure of governance globally. Therefore, it needs not simple solutions, but need political solutions. And this would include an awareness on the use of hunger, on the use of starvation, on the use of the issue of famine as weapons. And therefore, there's a need also to prosecute this, the use of hunger as a weapon, and the need to prosecute this as a crime, no? And with this, because of the nature of the problem, we need strong national movements. We need strong solidarity among peoples that will oppose war and occupations, that will also oppose the accompanying tyranny and fascism. We need to have strong movements and international solidarity that will oppose these neoliberal policies that put profit over people and planet. And of course, we need strong national movements and international solidarity to harness local initiatives, local practices that will build on self-reliance, at the same time empowering people and using the principles of food sovereignty. So we apologize that we are for some of the technical difficulties that might have affected the presentations, but as we have mentioned, we will be providing you copies of the presentations of our speaker. So before I call on the the moderator for the next session, we have Wafi, who will give us a solidarity message from Lebanon. Wafi? Wafi, you have the floor.
وافي لك الكلمة.
شكرا شكرا يعني أولا أود أن
Thank you very much. First, I would like to thank the organizers of this very important forum. I'd like to thank all of the participants, in particular, all of those who spoke before me. I thank the Arab Network and international networks for organizing this forum. I've gained a lot of information, and I am glad to share such a concern for the good of humanity. We are gathered today while we are in a terrifying context of a global pandemic that have brought down the labor market and the global economy, and will seriously increase food insecurity in the world. We'll be facing a new pandemic, the hunger pandemic. Our forum today reflects around the vision on food sovereignty and importance of strengthening solidarity in the face of increasing crimes against peasants and indigenous people, such as the Palestinian people, which is an indigenous people in Latin America as well, massacres of children discovered recently and frequently in Canada, and those who fight for the rights of their communities and for the sake of dignity. your forum and our forum today was a call to struggle for and fight for justice and equity at the global level, full respect for our rights as people, and putting an end to impunity for those who commit crimes against nature and the environment. I have learned from you that the food, climate, environment, economic, democratic, and health crises after the presentation by the colleague and the friend from Cuba and Venezuela and from Africa. So these crises have culminated during the pandemic, and that's forcing the entire humanity to transform the current agricultural and food paradigm as vital. All the crises have proven the importance and resilience of local food systems in the face of neoliberalism, which is trying hard to eradicate all of our efforts. Our forum today was a message that shows that food sovereignty promotes solidarity, and it's an essential aspect of humanity, as opposed to individualism, which is promoted by capitalism. Our forum shows that the people are the most important and not profit. Sovereignty over food is still the only coherent solution, and the solution that benefits rural families and all of the consumers in our countries. I'm speaking to you from Lebanon, my country, which is actually now standing on the verge of catastrophe, and none of the decision makers are taking serious steps to save it. The United States is linking the rescue of Lebanon to two issues. First, abandoning the resistance against the Israeli aggression and yielding to the gate of the International Monetary Fund's terms and conditions and its neoliberal prescriptions in order to grant us loans. Linking Lebanon's aid to that has become a threat to the lives of the Lebanese and the entire Lebanese entity. That's because the pressure that is imposed and besieged against Lebanon do not affect the corrupt, as they say, but rather makes the Lebanese people alone pay a heavy price that threatens the lives of the people and their future. What we witness with the migration of entire families with their children and young ones is an evidence of the despair of the Lebanese, imposing sanctions, the blockade on Lebanon, preventing the entry of the US dollars, the loss of aid, medicine, fuel, and food, all the way to starvation. That's what they're applying in Lebanon, Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, and anywhere across the globe, anywhere in the world that doesn't agree with any of the world's dominant superpowers. In light of this ambiguous and miserable situation, UNICEF came to confirm that 77% of the Lebanese families, for example, didn't find enough money to buy food during the month of July. Food and medicine are missing. They're lacking in Lebanon amidst the collapse of the economy. And it was even said that it is worse than the collapse of the Wall Street in absolute terms, according to the Times, the US Times. However, in Lebanon, offers were made to the Lebanese authority by Iran, Russia, and China to grant us fuel with the local currency. However, the authority is afraid for its own money in the American banks. They're afraid of sanctions and confiscation by Washington if they had eased, towards such countries. So they'd rather preferred for the country to plunge into darkness and the people into hunger and disease. So instead of having their money damaged and affected, money that had been stolen from the savings of the Lebanese people and the banks that got broke. Currently, we are waiting for the formation of the new government. However, the horizon is still dark while waiting for regional and international authorities to get into it. Let me conclude with the optimism of the Brazilian theologian, Frei Beto, who is a prominent liberation theologian and advisor to the FAO, who has hopeful proposals in the Zero Hunger program. which succeeded in significantly reducing the number of hungry people in Brazil, for instance, during the rule of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. And we hope that he'd be back to lead Brazil and to contribute to significantly alleviating the hunger in the country. This program that is presided by the theologian Frei Beto contributed largely to alleviating the hunger map in the region in general. Frei Beto issued several warnings to stop the decline in grain and cereal production, to stop the massive rise in prices that increases the number of the poor and doubles the number of the hungry, and to confront the blockade imposed on our countries, for example. As we have already mentioned, we have Lebanon and Cuba, as well as Venezuela, and all of the countries that oppose the hegemony and oppose the monopolizing multinationals. That is why Beto considers that production of vegetables and fruit-bearing gardens have to be increased, and we need to overcome this double siege, the siege from the outside and the intellectual and psychological siege at the level of our population. We should see how we can free our thinking in order to think of alternatives to confront the siege. We do not know how the world will turn out to be after the pandemic. First, because there is still no date for the elimination of the pandemic. We cannot tell, we don't know when we will get to an end, but there is one thing that is certain, and that's that the pandemic came from an environmental defect that resulted in that, because nature have lived for millions of years without such an uncomfortable existence of the humankind, and the nature can live millions of years more without the human mankind, but people cannot live without nature. We depend on nature largely, not only for food, but everything we use, like computers, furniture, shoes, clothes, raw material, all comes from nature. That is why we should be encouraging the environmental conservation. Thank you very much. My deep love and appreciation and respect your efforts, and I'm always ready to support you, to support this noble and human cause that you work for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wafi. I now hand you to our moderator for the third session. Alex Barrios, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Beb. Nice to see you. And I will ask all the participants to please use the interpretation channels, because I will turn into Spanish. I am from Bolivia, and I would prefer to use my own language.
Good afternoon, good day, good night to everybody who is taking part of. I'm really happy to be in this space, in this dialogue, to accompany you in this third part. Those who've given their time, I'd like to thank you, who've shared their experiences, shared their realities, and the introductory words from the PCFF. Some of us have been motivated to deepen into this topic. This subject is really important for us. This space is allowing, as for organization and civil society organisms, leaders of some local organizations as representatives of grassroots organizations, allowing us to deepen our knowledge, to raise a critical awareness, and through this to be able to make something constructive for our organizations. In the first words that we were said, long live international solidarity. And this is a very important time for now, for the dialogue that's being generated and for close relationships among us as defenders of rural, indigenous communities, peasants, peoples, that we can all work together and cohese. Hello to everyone from Bolivia. My name's Alejandro Barrios. I'm part of Hipoteca, which is an NGO which claims the Tomascari struggle, who is an indigenous leader who fought for sovereignty and the self-determination of indigenous peoples. In this third session, we are going to talk a little bit more. We've had different approaches. We've heard about humanitarian aid, the role that aid plays in this and others that we've been sharing, but those participants who are with us from more hundreds of people here who are watching us through Facebook, they also have their own initiatives, their own readings, or they maybe want to complement this panel with their ideas. So I'm going to share with you 3 guiding questions that will allow us to deepen our analysis. The first question is, what do you think is a manifestation of crisis or reality in this crisis we've been talking about? What do you think you've seen in food system that has not yet been discussed? So what type of reality, additional realities have you seen in your own scenarios, and what can you share with our panelists? That's our first question. So the crisis that you've seen in your food systems. The second question, not just to be on an analytical level, but we also want to propose solutions. So in the solution of crisis, what solution have you seen in this context of crisis? And what solutions do we see from our own organizations, from our own readings in a crisis context of crisis? And lastly, it's important to have clear key messages that are related to food systems or to the Global People's Summit or the UNFSS that's taking place in September. We want some main messages. We want to use a political language to transmit our message to these spaces. So what is your message you would like to convey? So everyone who's connected on Zoom in this webinar, please raise your hand. I will let you speak in the order that you raise your hand. Please raise it in the Zoom function. And we're going to have 3 minutes to each participant so that they can share on the 3 questions that I've spoken about. Please, you can also write something in the chat. We can write it afterwards, but it's also good to listen to each other. So I invite those who are still here, please raise your hand, or you can press on the raise hand option in Zoom and you will speak for 3 minutes. Thank you. The floor is over to you.
A ver, espéreme un segundito. Ahora sí.
1 second. We have Rahida Razri. Please excuse me if I said your name wrong. Rahida Masri, can you please take the floor?
راغدة، دكتورة راغدة، أنت موجودة؟
Tiene el micrófono apagado. You have the mic off, Rahida Masri, please, if you can turn on your mic and take the, yes. We can hear you now. Sorry. Your mic is off again. If you can turn on your mic, please. You raised your hand. Or if while she adjusts the technical issue, we will go to the next person, but I cannot read the names. Okay, go ahead. Razan, you are there. Could you help me with the translation, please?
Yes, Raghida's mic is on. راغدة بتقدري تحكي.
نحن يعني النشاط اللي قلنا فيه.
Hello, and thank you for giving me the floor. This activity is of utmost importance at this critical time. While the peoples of our countries suffer major pressures, shocks as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and economic crisis, especially for us in Lebanon, we are suffering more than other countries because of the economic situation. And we hope that solutions will be provided, and we hope that we will achieve justice for different peoples and especially for our country.
Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead, please. We have someone else with their hand raised, but I cannot read the name in Arabic. I hope you can help me, Razan, please.
السلام عليكم، مساء الخير.
أسماء الشائبي. ست أسماء.
Mrs. Asma Al-Shaibi. This is the name written in Arabic. We can hear you, says Mariam. Asma, go ahead. Thank you very much for this webinar. And Alejandro, I know that you appreciate your language, and I was speaking in Arabic because I also love my own language, and you can also be listening to the interpretation. My name is Asma Al-Shaibi. I work in an environmental organization focusing on raising awareness for the future generations, especially amongst the children from 3 years of age until 17 years of age. Environmental awareness for this age category. We have major activities in this regards, and we have noticed that legislations, whether they are local legislations or even international agreements, whether we're talking about international agreements pertaining to the climate, all focus on the respect of the environment and impose on us certain requirements and conditions to be respected. However, if we look at the infrastructure, we need to see whether the infrastructure is appropriate to actually help implement such agreements. I believe that there is a major gap between the existing agreements and what is already available in terms of infrastructure. This is my first point. Second, the local legislations in the Arab countries do not match with international agreements. And there is no respect for the specificities of countries, especially Islamist and Arabic countries in particular. Moreover, what is also important for us as Arab communities is the nature and the quality of food in itself. For instance, in the Islamic countries, we do have some religious beliefs that are compatible with our beliefs. The food should be compatible with our religious beliefs, and we don't want Western or foreign countries to impose any food systems on us. This is why we need to be partners with the other stakeholders. We need to have our maneuver of freedom to also talk about our beliefs. Thank you for your honesty and also pointing the finger to the real issues. We are called the third world countries, and we feel that we are the landfill of the revolution and the industrialist countries.
Thank you. Please, if you're not speaking, please can you put yourself on mute to not interrupt people who are speaking, please. Who wants to speak next? Sorry, I'm not sure if I pronounce your name properly. Please excuse my pronunciation. Noe El Kahil. Excuse my pronunciation.
Por favor, tome la palabra.
Please go ahead and speak.
Hello, peace be upon you.
Continúe, por favor, le escuchamos. Está con el micrófono apagado.
Please go ahead. Your microphone is switched off.
Hello, everyone. I work in an organization focusing on countering poverty in Morocco. Allow me to share with you the experience of Morocco when it comes to eradicating poverty. In the past 10 years, Morocco has encouraged the so-called social economy. The social economy where women play a vital role. Women account to 80% of the stakeholders in this social economy. It has been evident that women have a lot of enthusiasm and they have empowered the production. When we talk about social economy, the social economy does not require a major capital. It only requires ideas and a limited capital. However, on the other hand, this social economy would allow us to produce local goods. This is local production. Local production that still have a symbolic importance. We have revived many food productions that were no longer produced, that no longer existed in the past 30 or 40 years. This social economy allowed us to empower women to also focus on better job opportunities for women. And here between brackets, allow me to salute Moroccan women, Arab women, and Islamic women for the success they have proven and for taking part in eradicating poverty through those activities. This social economy has been essential and it has led to many cooperatives. Right now in Morocco, we have around 30,000 cooperatives and more than 130,000 organizations working in this regard. This is the experience of Morocco, and this social economy can also be a pioneering project that can also be applied elsewhere, which will also help eradicate poverty and provide better foods through the social economy approach. Especially that we work in the oasis in the middle of the desert. Ever since 1970, the oasis was no longer used, but thanks to this recent approach, we are using all the production of palm trees, such as dates, such as using the dates for raw material for design purposes. The same applies for olive trees, for argan trees, and for different other types of productions. This is why we would like to share with you the experience of Morocco with you. Thank you once again for this webinar. And thank you for giving us the floor to talk about our experience. I think that today it is of utmost importance to talk about local production, and many of the third world countries suffer from similar issues. In my opinion, we can only eradicate poverty when we rely on ourselves through a social economy approach, which will allow us to eradicate poverty, as I said before. I am personally willing and ready to share more details about the experience of Morocco in any future webinars. Thank you once again for allowing me to share with you my experience.
Muchas gracias y un saludo hasta Marruecos.
Thank you, and we send you. We want to say hello to all of you in Morocco. We want to remember we only have 5 more minutes in this space of dialogue, so please don't say any more than 3 minutes, please. Please only talk for 3 minutes. Lena, Saleh, you have your hand raised. Sorry for the pronunciation. Yes. Please turn on your mic.
Lena Saleh, you have your hand.
Okay.
Sorry,
No,
I
go
didn't
ahead,
ask.
please. Thank you.
I did not ask for to talk.
Okay, we saw your hand raised, but do you want to participate now, or do you prefer not?
Yeah, I will continue. Yes.
Please go ahead.
No. I just joined. I was retained with another appointment,
Okay.
but I will not interfere now. I will not talk now.
Okay, it's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much anyway. So we have someone else. It's Isalm Magaire. Isalm, sorry. Go ahead, Isalm. Please turn on your mic.
الإسلام الحديث سيد إسلام مغايرة.
Yes.
الحديث لك الآن لأنه إيدك مرفوعة.
الآن صوت.
Okay. Now we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, السلام عليكم.
Good morning, peace be upon you. Good morning or afternoon. I am Islam from Jordan. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I would like to salute all your efforts, and I would like to highlight the importance of this topic in light of what the world and the Arab region in particular are facing today in terms of problems as a result of wars and occupation. Allow me to also intervene and to talk about multinational companies controlling quantities, controlling prices of basic food commodities, and putting more pressures on the peoples and extorting or blackmailing countries to change their international political stances. This is why I would like to ask you to have a call for countries around the world in order to stop these countries from importing weapons for the countries where we have front lines and internal conflicts. I believe that this is a call for the different countries of the world to ensure at least a minimum level of dignity and livelihoods and peace and stability. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Isal.
Thank you, Isal. Thank you for your call to the people who want to participate. Please, if you want to participate, press the button to lift your hand up. We are going to finish the dialogue now to have a very short conclusion to finish our very important event today. I don't think anyone else wants to say anything. No one else has their hand raised. Okay, we just have one more person. Asisa, please turn on your microphone. You have the floor.
Okay, go ahead. Your mic, okay. Now.
Je vais parler en français si ça ne vous dérange pas. Bonjour à tous, merci beaucoup.
Good morning, everyone. From all the, thank you for the contributions that we had. We have a situation of systemic crisis that makes it so that our territory, our natural resources, our history, our knowledge are being demolished by a war strategy. Founders who are funding between quoted brackets, but actually indebting us, are rejecting our food sovereignty and take it as a strategic objective. Food sovereignty is developing territories, is providing food for the people and not for export or industrial food being brought in. It calls for more water and we don't have water. And those techniques call for us into investing in the international economy, that is providing funds for multinationals, and those put our countries to debt, and we are hungry. Today in Tunisia, there were laws that were voted and aiming at selling at a symbolic amount land to strangers, and the colonial system is right at our door. It is an old system, but it is now taking a new version. So the first thing we are asking is that funders will coordinate everything. When there are projects, they should coordinate their objectives, their indicators, and we should stop thinking that social and solidarity means of economy could be done without the development of the people. We talk of credit like funding for the people, but we don't talk about the development of the territories, developing the resources that we have. The second aspect that is quite important is that corruption is a factor, is a key factor in wars, in selling of lands, in armaments, and in the subjection of political power that rejects resistance as a part and parcel of the attempt of the people to survive. I would like to thank all my friends in the world. We need to get together to defend our livelihood and our dignity, as well as the future of our children. Let us unite to safeguard our resources, safeguard and defend ourselves against multinational organizations that are trying to sell transformed food to us, and we should not give up our lands and our territories. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Isa. Y realmente las últimas palabras que mencionas.
Thank you for your final words. The last words that you said are so important, and we must all maintain our unity amongst our peoples, amongst our communities, because this is a difficult struggle. It's complicated. It's hard to defend our natural resources, our lands, our sovereignty. So with this, I would like to synthesize, conclude. I'm sorry if I've left anything out. I know sometimes it's hard with the interpretation, with the translation. Sometimes things are lost in translation. But first element is I would like to say that all this pressure that we are feeling has been aggravated by the pandemic, by the economic crisis, and is made worse by war, sanctions, and occupation under which, and the blockades under which our countries and communities, our peoples live. We've also heard a very important contribution about how we should think beyond legislation, beyond agreements, international conventions, spaces of the UN and international spaces, when these legislations terrorize, they don't respect the defense of the environment, they don't improve the life of people or in national sovereignty or cultures. We've also heard around the realities, the need to have trade, and that importing arms only generates more conflict within our regions. We've also spoken about the positive experience of Morocco, and I would like to share this positive experience of how social economy through cooperatives and through organizations that are mostly organized around solidarity and have had huge successes in eradicating poverty and can solve food for the people. Another important aspect which we have spoken about and which I personally consider that we should is about controlling multinational businesses, their control over our food production, and we must fight for our food from the grassroots. We must fight against the food crisis and about food supply, and we are subjected to this. Lastly, we have also had in the chat a request for the final topic is fighting for food sovereignty, not just for food security, but food sovereignty should be the strategic point for all of projects that should be in cooperation. We need food sovereignty. And finally, the most important of today is listening to the message of solidarity among countries, among peoples and nations, and the need to focus on our food sovereignty and being independent of hunger, which is promoted by war and internal conflict. Today, I would like to thank all of the organizers of this space who've given their time to share their experiences, those who have, there have been over 100 attendees today, and many other people in Facebook and other spaces. I would like to give a last request, make a last request. Can we please all turn on our cameras to take a photo of all the participants? It would be a lovely remembrance, a lovely reminder of today. Please all turn your cameras on so we can take a photo. We can all say goodbye and show international solidarity together. Please, let's all take a photo.
Alex, if we wait just 1 minute,
do we have
because
the photo?
we are promoting attendees. We are promoting attendees into panelists, so they are able to open their cameras. So I'm asking my colleagues to go ahead and promote them to panelists.
Ahora todos somos panelistas. Muy bien.
Okay, we're all panelists now. Great.
Mahmoud and
please turn on your cameras, everyone, so we can take a photo of everybody and have a lovely memory of today. Mariam.
colleagues, are you
الكاميرا ما فتحتش عندنا راه مباشر.
أهلين رزان، أهلين مريم.
Wally, I see you there. Razan, Gertrude.
أهلين رزان، مريم كيفكم؟
Hola Marita.
Hello, how are you?
Fine. Alex, how are you? Gertrude, nice to meet you.
Nice to see you all.
Hello.
Hola, Marita.
Hello, how are
Okay,
you?
we will wait for Diwa to
No.
let us know when we can. Ooh, انقطع. داعي انقطع انت انقطع.
I cannot see Sylvia.
We still have 20 attendees. We're currently promoting them.
يعطيكم العافية جميعا والله يقويكم.
نصور معاكم.
ونحن بس نحب نلفت نظر انه تجربة التعاونيات موجودة كمان عندنا بلبنان والدعم الاقتصادي.
I'd like to say that economic and social support, the role of women is very important. Cooperatives play an important role even here in Lebanon.
الناس مش قاعدة خلص.
محمد خلاص بكفي اكيد
apparently apparently they are trying, not everybody wants to open their cameras, or they can open their cameras. So let's try to open them one more time and have a screenshot. Mahmoud, can you take a screenshot?
Yes. The bean for environmental.
شلونك استاذ السلام؟ كيفك؟
محمود ما فهمتك.
محمود ما نشوفك.
هي مهناز.
اهلين يا مهناز، اهلين اختنا الكريمه، اهلا. سلام لكم اخواننا بالبحرين كلهم والله.
عليكم السلام.
عزيزة جدا.
يلا ابتسامة 1 2
يلا in photos.
Everybody smile.
Oh, on the first page.
Okay.
Thank
you.
بدنا إشارة بس سلام أو
We want the victory sign.
يلا.
Third page. Yeah, bring
جاي
up
معنا.
photos if you have one.
very good. شكرا. Thank you everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.
مع السلامة مع السلامة رزان.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody. Asra, I hope.
Thank you to our interpreters.
Yeah. To our interpreters.
How are you, Sylvia?
Thank you for the interpreters and the organizers and the secretariat and everybody.
Bye, everyone.
And Azra for
Thank you, everyone.
recovering from Corona.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.